Okay, we're gonna do this.
Wow, good evening, LBE audience, and we are so happy to be here. We thought we were going to have to reschedule, but we're very happy to have Assemblyman Reggie Jones Sawyer. I'm really excited about this evening's topic. Good evening, Madam Facilitator. How are you?
Good evening. I am well, and I am also very excited about this conversation and our guest this evening as well.
Well, I'm going to get off and stay backstage and enjoy the presentation. And the studio is yours. Take it away.
All right. Well, welcome, LBE community. Thank you for joining us this evening as we talk about California Assembly Bill 3121, which established a task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans starting in California. Our guest this evening is Assembly Member Reginald Byron Jones Sawyer Sr. He serves as the voice of the people of California's 59th district in the state assembly and was elected to the state legislature in November 2012, re-elected in 2014 and 2016. The district he represents encompasses a wide range of diverse, culturally rich, and dynamic communities. It lies entirely within Los Angeles County and includes the neighborhoods of South Los Angeles, Florence Firestone, Walnut Park, and a portion of Huntington Park. Assemblyman Joan Sawyer has worked hard to put local neighborhoods first and deliver results for his constituents, including playing a key role in California's economic recovery, helping invest more in local neighborhood schools while making higher education more affordable and accessible, advancing job creation policies, pushing for protection for immigrants, advocating for smart environmental protections that promote clean energy and green jobs, supporting more safeguards for working families and their rights, and spearheading forward-thinking policies that both promote public safety and enhance justice in the criminal justice system to make it more fair and transparent for all communities. Welcome, Assemblyman.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yes.
From the West Coast, it's always good to talk to people back east.
Well, we are almost right next door to you right now. We're here in Arizona in the city of Flagstaff, and we have been hosting this program for a couple of years now to bring awareness to issues impacting the Black community, both in Flagstaff, across the state of Arizona, and nationally. So we have great interest in this task force and this bill that you have been working on. So if you don't mind, Assemblyman, let's just dive into some questions on this and let you share with us. So as I shared at the beginning of this, Assembly Bill 3121 did establish that task force that's examining and developing plans for reparations for African Americans in California. Can you walk us through the charge of that task force? Oh, and I am showing you're muted right now.
Okay, there you go. I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes.
So thanks to the efforts of Dr. Shirley Weber, who authored the bill that created the task force to really look and do a deep dive into the whole industry of chattel slavery and its repercussions over the next 4 centuries after that. And the first part of our charge was to actually document all of the harms that have been foisted on African Americans in California, because a lot of people believe that slavery just happened in the South, and that, but most important, segregation, all of the Jim Crow laws, all the things that were going on in the South stayed in the South. Unfortunately, it moved its way west And I'm pretty sure Arizona experienced some of it too, and into California. And so we have a 400-page document that details in graphic form about what has happened not only in the prison industrial system, under housing, wealth, education, the wealth gap, the fact that our labor was stolen and used by others to enrich their fortunes, and a whole thing of even just land that we own that was taken from us. It's all there in detail, and in that 400-page document, it explains. And I'm sorry, my dog is barking, so he's doing his job, but hopefully he calms down a bit. And so what it really does entail, and what it does prove, especially to people here in California that don't believe that there were any harms done to African Americans here in California. If you read the report, unless you're just stuck in this feeling that you don't owe African Americans anything, then you are going to be unbending, because it is really clear what has been going on. So that first report actually was done on June 30th, 2022. The next report is the recommendations. And those recommendations is when the task force will end. And we are going to submit those recommendations to the legislature, to the assembly, and to the state senate, and ultimately the governor, to hopefully be signed. The recommendations will come to me, Assemblymember Reggie Jones Sawyer, and State Senator Steve Bradford. We will be the ones shepherding this through the legislature to determine what exactly what kind of reparation there will be. And it's we have like 13 different opportunities to give us and reverse the wrongs. I like to say there's been a river of racism running through the African American community. Not only do we need to have repair, but we also need to stop the river of racism that has been coming through our community for the last 4 decades. And so that's in the form of whether it's an apology, that's for of some kind of financial remuneration, that's in the form of what can we do so that we can make sure that our young people get the proper education, or even more important, higher education and access to that, to make sure that we can get access to being able to buy homes. Because the things that were done to African Americans prevent us not only from moving into certain neighborhoods, but we were also precluded from even being able to own property, which, if you look at what is the essential wealth gap, a critical part of that is owning property and owning homes. And then the fact that businesses, that we were forced out of a lot of businesses here in California because of the color of our skin. But most important, we didn't have access to capital. Capital is afforded to just about everybody, but African Americans. And how do you reverse that to make sure we get to capital? Because we probably have had, I'm sorry, I'm on my phone. We probably have had some of the greatest entrepreneurs we've ever had, but because they didn't have access to the ability to be part of the business market, they turned to what was convenient. And unfortunately, a lot of times that was drugs. And these individuals who were participating in the drug trade didn't have a degree in business, but they understood marketing, accounts receivable, payable, and they could keep the inventory in their head. We probably lost some of the most brilliant entrepreneurs we ever had in the drug trade. So how do we reverse that and get people into quality businesses, especially African American males, which are overrepresented in our prison plantation system here in California? We had 160 people, 60,000 people incarcerated in California. We were overrepresented in the criminal justice system. We were 3 times our population, percentage-wise, in the criminal justice system and incarcerated. We reduced that down to about 96,000, but there's a lot more that we need to do. And what we're going to do is take those savings and put it back into the community so that we can stop the school to prison pipeline. That is also endangering and harming our community. So once that report is given to the legislature, which is coming up real soon, on June 30th, 2023, it then, Mr. Bradford and I will have hearings, and we will discuss what is the appropriate way that we can make this into actionable items, into budget items, into legislative items, and that we could then weave through the legislature so that hopefully by 2025 we can see this first increment of reparations starting in January of 2025.
You know, one of the big roadblocks in the historic discussions of reparations on the local and state or even the national level always seems to come down to defining what it is that's meant by reparations. And you just recently were quoted on Fox News Digital expressing that reparations need to be more than simply financial compensation. So can you tell us and our audience, at least from your perspective, what are we talking about when we talk about reparations? And what does it mean for it to be more than simply a financial handout?
So let's just take the simple task of buying a home. As we all know here in California, when you get an appraisal, for whatever reason, our homes are appraised much less than our white counterparts. And so we don't get the full value of that. And so we need to stop that. You can stop that with legislation and putting in some safeguards to ensure that doesn't happen again. That doesn't have to necessarily have financial implications. We also are adversely impacted by credit, or we don't have access to credit or access to capital. We just remove those barriers that preclude us from being able to buy a home, which is in California, as you know, is very expensive. If we just remove some of those barriers, it would be great. So it's appraisals, credit, and of course, when we go to the door and say we want to buy a home, a lot of times we're told that home has already been sold or it's unavailable, and then someone that is non-African American come in after us, and all of a sudden the doors pushed wide open, and they're brought in and told not only that the house is for sale, but they can get it for much less than we would. So we need to. That's something we can remove legislatively to stop that. When it comes to barriers to education, I'm a firm believer that the public sector educational system, the reason why California is the fourth largest economy in the world, is because we, in our upper education system, back in the 60s, we basically made it free. And we had the best educated workforce on the planet. And then we moved from like eighth largest economy down to the fourth because people came to California with their businesses because they knew we had the most talented employee base. If we went back to that, where we provided African Americans an opportunity to have kind of free college, or we make college not only accessible but affordable to African Americans, and we can do that by looking at ways we can provide grants and things of that nature, or just like right now, our community college system is free. And if we provide financial literacy to get through the college education process, we can get them through and get people to get their AA, and then we maybe can work on how we can ensure that African Americans aren't saddled with a lot of debt after that. And there's a myriad of other things that we're looking at, and of course the apology letter, which from a soul searching point of it, making sure that the governor, when he issues that is not only from the heart, that African Americans can feel that California is truly sorry for what they did, over 4 centuries on African Americans here in California.
Thank you for that. I want to dive a little bit more into the housing and home ownership question, because we're seeing such a national conversation about this in terms of the housing crisis moves across the nation to make housing and ownership and renting more affordable for all people. But can you talk a little bit more about why it as a topic is so closely connected to segregation, discrimination, redlining, restrictive covenants, and so forth, and the needs for reparations specific to housing? And it looks like we may have lost.
Here he comes again. We'll get him back in. Hold on.
Am I back? Am I back? Am I back?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. You were talking about just housing and affordable housing and all.
Yeah. So the connection.
House homelessness or houseless. A lot of those people look like us. The fact that the majority of people I have Skid Row in Los Angeles in my district. And if we were to clean up Skid Row, if we were to provide housing just for Skid Row in Los Angeles, then Biden, he probably could get rid of 20% of the homeless problem in the country. That's how severe it is. That's how severe it is on us. And so we need to come up with a comprehensive plan, not only on mental health, drug addiction, and just dealing with the whole back into we can get them into a place where we can take care of them. Uh-oh. Am I freaking out on you again?
You froze for a moment there, but we caught you right. So you're back with us again, it sounds like. And I see it looks like Dr. Shauna Charles may have joined us.
Hello, yes, how are you?
Hi, wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Charles.
Absolutely. I just want to let everyone know in the broadcast that I will be dropping some links in the chat where they can learn more about the task force work, and the report. So please take a look in the chat for more information to help support the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. I guess I'm gonna have to get a new internet system over here.
I can still hear you. Your image is frozen, but your audio is still coming through. Assembly number.
Maybe if I took off the camera, you can just hear me.
And that's fine. We want to engage with you as long as we can get you. So we're just honored to be able to have this conversation, and we look forward to seeing those links come through from Dr. Charles, and we'll be sure to share those out to our audience as well, so that they can continue to read and learn more about this important piece of legislation.
The most important thing I would be remiss is the way we look at this task force and what we ultimately will do. It will be the blueprint for every local municipality, every state agency, and what the federal government needs to do as we start to move forward with reparations. We don't think we have the panacea for everything, but we think we will have a floor plan that anyone can just take our data and apply it to their own situation and be able to come up with their own reparations program. Because we think every state and municipality might be a little unique, and you need to apply it to each of your municipalities so that it makes sense but most important, that you can get it done. Because at the end of the day, it's about actually getting it done. And I think that will be the most important thing that we do.
That's so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, it's been one of the highlights of everything that I've been reading about this, the task force and the interim report that came out last year is just that important message of this being a blueprint for the rest of the nation. And one of the questions that tends to come up a lot is that it's been noted that California was never a slave state. And so that's led some to question, why is California considering reparations at all? But frankly, I believe that as you noted, 400 plus page report that you and the others on the task force shared last year, and much of your answer this evening has answered that question very soundly. But for those who may not be as familiar with it, can you please share with us what the argument for reparations in California comes from, and what your research has borne out in terms of California's history with some of the segregatory and other discriminatory practices that have led you in this direction?
When you read the report, a lot of people are when they read that the Klan had a chapter not only here in California, but they were very, very prevalent all through California. There were governors that basically have said they did not want African Americans to come here. There were slave owners that could work with California here to send slaves back to the South. There were lynchings here in California as they were having in the South. The discriminatory practices of, as you probably have heard of Bruce's Beach, where a family had the only spot where African Americans could go to the beach in a place called Manhattan Beach. It was a very, very wealthy white area. That land was basically taken from them through eminent domain and other governmental vehicles to take that land away from Black people. And there was a lot of incidents that we found out all over California that was done like that. And even areas where we homesteaded, they would cut off the water so that the homestead would die out and people the African Americans couldn't create their own communities. The cross burnings, the lynching, all of that was happening here in California. A lot of people don't know that. There were laws on the books that said that Black people couldn't marry out of their race. And it was a crime. It was a crime if you did it, punishable by imprisonment. And so when you think of the South and all the things, those were things were done here and transferred here and was exploiting us. We may not have been on cotton fields, but when we did work, we got paid less than our white counterparts. And people used our blood, our sweat, and our tears to advance and become very wealthy here in California. That's why we're the fourth largest economy, because of what African Americans sacrificed over time. When I hear people complain or say, "Oh my God, it's going to be $800 billion that could be given to African Americans," I say to you, if you divide that by 400 years, it's only $2 billion a year. And I know we toiled and labored more than $2 billion a year over those 4 centuries, those hundreds of years of us not being able and afforded what we ultimately should have gotten as Americans and as Californians. And so when you go through all of that and you realize there was a mirror kind of oppression done, and the way we're doing this is, it's not about race. is about harms. And when you read the 400-page report, you read all the harms from chattel slavery. That's why we're going in, looking at the descendants of slaves, because hopefully we can prove that harm to a particular group of people. And even if we were to take this to court, we could prove that in a court. But most important, we might even be able to monetize what that harm is, just like any civil suit. And so that is the whole premise of what we're moving forward. And we're hoping, because then here in California, we have Prop 209, which eliminated affirmative action, which just eviscerated all of the programs that we had to help us get to not get a leg up, to at least be at a level playing field with our white counterparts. All those programs are gone. So now we need to re-energize and then come back and then just tell individuals who don't believe that there was any harms to the African Americans that yes, it has been done, but most important, we now need to move toward making this a just society, and not just us.
What do you say to those who call the concept of reparations for Black Americans nothing more than a handout, or suggest that Black people should be satisfied with the progress that has been made post-slavery? We should be satisfied with the progress post-Jim Crow, or the various civil rights acts, or voting rights, or since we elected a Black president, or since we had a Black vice president, and so forth. It seems like at every moment of progress, there's the question of why aren't you satisfied? And it sounds like you certainly have an answer to that in this plan.
So when I say this is a blueprint for the atrocities for African Americans, but there's also a blueprint for the atrocities to Native Americans, to the Asian Pacific Islander community, to women, and to Latinos. If you add up all of that, that's the majority of America. And what I tell my other brothers and sisters of color, that you can come in behind us and you can let America know what has happened to you, so that you too can get your reparations. We've always, affirmative action may have started with, and civil rights may have started with African Americans, but we all know white women and Latinos and API came rushing to the door right behind us and also benefited from it. I would say to them that we need to expose all of this so that people all will know what has been done, so we can right the wrong. But I think the most important thing, that we don't repeat. We don't repeat what we've done. When you've got people who do not want critical race theory taught, it's because they know that once all of these harms get out, that people are going to be more inclined to want to do reparations for all. And I've talked to some of my white counterparts that are a little middle-aged or a little older, that have said they've noticed that their children understand reparations much more than they do. They accept reparations much more than they do, because they weren't born or taught some of the racial divide that's in our country right now, and they're more inclined to come in, and when they take over this world, they're probably going to be more inclined to do the right thing for not only African Americans, but for women, for Latinos, for API, and for Native Americans. And that would make this whole country as a whole much better. Again, what we're starting is good for everybody. And that's what I need to make sure that everyone who may not truly understand reparations needs to understand reparations is for all, not just for us.
I want to thank Dr. Charles, who has been sharing some comments in the chat here, and we've been posting them on to the conversation for those who are viewing currently live on Facebook, and many others will be watching later when we restream this to YouTube. But a lot of what she's sharing is really relevant information that I want to actually read into the conversation for those who won't see it on our Facebook screen. She shared that California entered the Union as a non-slave state, but from 1852 to 1855, the California legislature passed fugitive slave laws, allowing anyone accused of escaping enslavement to be chased down, dragged before a court, and sent back to the South, even if they had been living in the free state of California. California became a strong Klan state with a sizable and violent Klan resurgence emerging in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Oakland, Fresno, Riverside, Sacramento, Anaheim, and San Jose. Glendale, Pasadena, and Culver City were sundown towns, excluding African Americans through laws, intimidation, or violence. Assembly member, this all is so important to the conversation and maintaining this historic memory and reconciling, frankly, with this historic memory. Here in Flagstaff, we just a few years ago were able to pass a Live Black Experience strategic plan for our city that started the conversation here and made people aware as we talk about blueprints that are the first of their kind. It was the first in the nation of its kind to start talking about what are some active steps that we can take as a community to really start addressing these disparities and recognizing the history of a people that have, for all intents and measures, been forgotten by our local municipalities throughout the state and in many ways throughout the nation. I'm curious as to your thoughts of how open the state of California is to the proposals that you're putting forward and what you see the response being as you move towards in the next several months or over the next year, actually bringing forward some of the recommended actions that are coming from the work that you've been doing for the past year with this.
So the most important thing, as Senator Bradford and I pursue what the actionable items will be, is teaching people and having people learn what this is all about, especially the harms. I firmly believe that once you lay out the case and the facts to anyone that is reasonable, we will be able to get individuals on board with the concept of reparations, and that's not going to be easy because people have preconceived ideas about this country. What I talk about a lot of times is a lot of my colleagues have this racial alger kind of feeling that we all should pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and that's what the American dream is all about. And I have to remind them that it's really hard to pull yourself up with your own bootstraps when someone has their foot on your neck. It's really hard to stand up when that is happening. And so once they understand that what these barriers are, that are not only in our governmental codes. Look, we tried last year. When I say we, the Assembly and the Senate. There's in our state constitution, there's a provision for slavery that's still in our constitution, in our state constitution. So now Congresswoman Sidney Comlager tried to have that removed out of the language of our Constitution. And it was stopped by progressive Democrats here in California. So it tells me that we have a lot of education we have to do. There's a lot of learning that individuals need to understand why this is so important. Because something as simple as making sure that the term and the fact that you can enslave someone in California still in 2023 because it's in our Constitution, and to be told that it's too expensive for us to remove that language, because the language basically says that we can imprison people and then have them work for us for 8 cents on the dollar. They're making 8 cents an hour in our prison plantation system, making furniture and all sorts of things. And it's another form of chattel slavery. And the fact that we could not remove that out of our Constitution because someone believed that then it would cost too much to keep people in prison because you would have to pay them for their hard-earned work. In a lot of ways, it's embarrassing because that just happened last year, and so I have no illusions about what we need to do to convince our non-African American counterparts why this is important.
We had a question from an audience member that asked, what do you say to people who say it's all about the money?
I would tell people, when you look at our report, there's about 13, 14 different areas that we're looking at. There's really only one area that talks about financial remuneration. Reparations is more than a check. And if you're talking about reversing centuries of racism and segregation, we're going to have to do programs. We're going to have to provide resources. We're going to have to change laws. We're going to have to change practices. We're going to have to change principles that are inherent in California's, not only their laws, but the way we do things, in our business practices, that we're going to have to, so that my hope is that when I'm sitting in my rocking chair with my great grandkids and they're asking about why their lives is so much better now, that they look back at what we're doing in reparation and the fact that we stopped or reversed a lot of practices that were foisted on us, that will make things much better for African Americans, and that their lives are much better than it was before. And I based that on my uncle was one of the Little Rock Nine, one of 9 kids that integrated Central High School in 1957. My uncle was beaten, he was kicked. One time he was left for dead in a bathroom. And they did all sorts of horrendous things to him. And he was just trying to get into high school. Think about that. High school. He was trying to go to the best high school in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. And there were crowds that every day called him names and jeered at him. And his life was endangered every day. But because of his sacrifice, I'm able to not only be in a doctorate program at USC, I graduated from the University of Southern California, went on to Harvard with no problems. My life is so much better because of the sacrifices that he did. And that's what I'm looking for. Generational change, sustainable change, change that you can see over decades and centuries that will help move our people to a better place. And that's not always financial. A lot of it will depend on what we do in government, in business, and just society as a whole to make changes.
I just have to say, and especially after hearing that last story you just shared, again, what an honor it is to be speaking with you this evening. To understand that I and our audience and all who will hear this are entertaining just history. We are in the presence of history that continues to echo and resound with all of us. And it's such important history that we need to continuously call back into our memory and honor and repair in the ways that you're talking about tonight. So thank you again for joining us. I want to read another message from Dr. Charles, who speaks to the question of why reparations in California, and speaks into another important question that I'll ask you to follow up on. He wrote the question, "I am not guilty of slavery, nor my ancestors. Therefore, I should not be responsible for paying reparations." And she says the answer is, while non-Black individuals may not have participated directly in slavery, they have benefited from the direct actions, policies, and decisions that, while harming Black Americans, created and sustained generational wealth to this day for those in the majority. And I just ask if you, Assembly Member, could expand on that and speak further into that. The question of, my ancestors weren't guilty of X, Y, or Z, so why should I be responsible for paying for it? What do you say as a response to that sort of a question?
Well, one of the things about going to institutions like Harvard and USC or to Yale and others, you see how generational wealth or generational privilege helps each generation after it succeed and move up higher and higher while pushing down others that are not part of that hierarchy. And that's really what has happened with African Americans, that there are individuals who advances jobs or being able to be in a better neighborhood, being able to schools, being able to have better grocery stores. As simple as that. All of that is because of white privilege. And that is the reason why we need to have reparation, so we can level for those who don't believe that their fathers not only took advantage of it, but they laid the groundwork for being able to.
Hi, I think we lost him. This is Dr. Charles. I wanted to drop this in the group chat, but I want to just encourage everyone to, again, take a look at the interim report. There's some really great statistics for California and some national statistics. And I want to just read one that I think wowed me when I first went through the report. And it talks about, the wealth gap. So I know the Assembly member was talking about the generational wealth. So it says in 2015, the median wealth for singles, okay, white men, $28,900, Black men, $300, white women, $15,640, and Black women, $200. I couldn't believe that when I read that stat. It's just such a big difference when we're talking about wealth and generational wealth. So I wanted to share that, and all of these stats and the information I'm dropping is coming directly from the interim report. I know the recommendations, they will be coming up with final recommendations, but take a look at some of the national data and some of the data in California to just understand the foundation of why this work is being done and why it's so important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Charles. And I'd actually love for you to stay on, because I do believe we did lose the assembly member, at least for a moment here. And I think we were coming towards the end of his available time. But first of all, I'd love for you to reshare that statistic, because it is one that is just shocking, stunning to hear. And I think a lot of people are not aware of. But also, if you could share your role with this task force and with the work that's being done in California, we would love to hear that from you.
Okay, first, I apologize for not being on screen. I don't usually talk because I am not a part of the task force, but I just think it's important to drop some of and share some of the specific information, as well as some of the statistics that was founded in the report from the work that they have done. But my name is Dr. Shauna Charles. I own a company called Charles Communications Group, and I am working with the task force to help disseminate the information throughout California, primarily about the task force work, the recommendations, the interim report, and information like that. Because although the task force is coming to a sunset and will be making their final recommendations, there is a second part to get it through the legislature, as Assembly Joan Sawyer mentioned, and Senator Steve Bradford will have to now take these recommendations and help move it forward that way for it to be passed in the legislation. A lot of that work is going to be done through public awareness. And so my role now is to begin to engage the public about this topic, because their help will be needed to get this passed, will be needed to help get this passed in the legislature and to be moved forward. So that is my role for the task force. I hope you guys have been hearing it throughout the media. We've been doing a lot of media work. And again, just really spreading the word and doing some just virtual conferences like this. We've been partnering with a lot of organizations who are interested in endorsing the California Reparations Task Force, the report, and the work. And I also thank you guys for reaching out to share this information. I know a lot of this is specific to California, but a lot of states and cities are looking at what reparations looks like for them. So anyway, the assembly member is back. I will find some more stats to help support the conversation as we are going through this. And then if there are any specific questions, please drop them in the chat and I will try to get answers for them to just help drive the conversation and to keep it moving forward, okay?
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles. And before turning it back over to the assemblyman, I would just love if you could just one more time share the statistic that you just shared with us on those.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it was leading from the assembly member talking about the generational wealth. And so this is in chapter 13, and it is around the wealth gap. And so in 2015, the median wealth for singles for white men, it was $28,900. For Black men, it was $300. For white women, it was $15,640. And for Black women, it was $200.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Assemblyman, I believe we have you back. Are you able to hear me?
We'll see how long I can last.
Okay. Well, I understood, sir, that you might have had a hard stop at around 7 o'clock. So we want to honor your time and your team's time. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, and just one last question on what do you think it is that moves reparations discussions and efforts so much more effectively at more localized levels, even as they have historically stalled at the federal level. So what is keeping California's conversation moving, or some of the more local discussions moving for you and your state?
So as you probably know, California is probably one of the most diverse. And we're majority minority state. That reparations isn't just for us. It'll be a blueprint for everyone. We will have much more success at moving this forward. That is, uh, organizations, other or
Oh, and I believe we have lost the assembly member again.
Yes.
But he was starting to speak into some of the, the diversity of the state and the localities there. And Dr. Charles, I think you did come off mute there for a moment. If you had something to add there from maybe some information from the report that helped to answer that question as well.
I was looking at the key findings to see if I could find something specific for you, but I probably would want to say that California, I would have to assume that the fact that they're even, moving forward with this has some type of consciousness around this. So one of the key findings, and a lot of this is just around the history to probably help understand. I don't think I can speak to why, but just looking at some of the key findings that I'll share with you here out of the report is it says things like federal and state governments, including California, fail to protect Black artists, culture makers, and media makers from discrimination and simultaneously promoted discriminatory narratives. Federal, state, and local government actions, including in California, directly segregated and discriminated against African Americans at work. And then American government at all levels, including in California, historically criminalized African Americans for the purposes of social control and to maintain an economy based on exploited Black labor. So I think some of those key findings will help understand maybe why they are moving forward with trying to understand reparations and how to, right the harms the best way, that they can. So that is probably why this task force was put together to study and develop reparations proposals.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's wonderful information. We are so grateful to both you and the Assembly member for joining us tonight for speaking through this. And I want to invite Reverend Dr. Bernadine Lewis, the co-host of this program, on for just some final thoughts as we wrap up our conversation tonight. Dr. Lewis, I'll just share from my perspective, one of the most interesting things in this, and as I've been doing other readings on reparations efforts across the country and just racial reckonings, frankly, that are happening all over the nation. One of the things that I've seen has been the conversations from The Guardian, actually overseas in Great Britain, as they have been undergoing some racial reckoning and understanding their own prosperity on the backs of chattel slavery. And looking at the Boston Globe, which last year put out an editorial in which the title was basically, "We messed up, we're sorry," and addressing some of their racial history. And it seems to me, to cut my stream of consciousness short here, it seems to me that where we're seeing a lot of the movement happen most meaningfully is at those local levels where they're starting to see these are important questions and conversations that we can no longer afford to not deal with, that we can no longer afford to not grapple with and have these conversations and face the history that's led us to where we are now. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts or takeaways from this conversation and what you think this means for our community or for the nation as a whole or anything at all.
I certainly applaud California and I think when we were talking before we went live, I mentioned how California always seems to be um, right on the pulse um, of issues like this. It's out of California that we have the Hair Act, um, and so I'm grateful tonight for this conversation, which is one that I'm happy that we're doing, that we have got to expand this all over the nation. This should be a hot topic um, for any organization, um, for any conscience aware of anyone who is aware um, and embraces the true history of America. And so um, I yes, I don't know. Reparations. I like the fact, I think it was raised this evening, that reparations is more than a check. And so, uh, after we first acknowledge um, the true history and why we find ourselves where we are today, and after we have a period of healing, then I think, and as you said, we are beginning to hear whisperings, but I'm waiting for the loud boom, the loud voices, and for reparations to be spoken in more, how would I say it, powerful, from more powerful entities, namely corporate, um, government, and that is why I love this project, because we have the honor and the privilege to bring these um, difficult, challenging conversations to the forefront. So I'm certainly grateful for Dr. Charles and Assembly member um, for joining us this evening. And I know usually after these live streams and we post on YouTube on our page is where we see the larger numbers. So it is my expectation that the LBE will have helped California in a small but yet very significant way of raising awareness of this bill and of this project. So we still have a long ways to go, and I'd like to ask if we could come back in a few months just to hear some updates and progress on where California is with this.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that we can make that happen. So just a few updates. The task force does have 2 more public hearings. They have one May 6th, and then they have one June 30th. You can view them live on the DOJ, California DOJ website if you're interested in seeing what happens, as well as they do sunset June 30th. So there will technically be no more task force, but the members will still be doing the work. And that's where the assembly member and the senator really come in now, because the recommendations will be handed off. And the public awareness campaign now that needs, that kind of needs the legs. And I know Ms. House, you were asking about what can be done at the local level. And this is where the local level really matters. This is where the grassroots efforts really matter. This is where the public and the people really matter to help support what the legislation is going to vote on and to do. And I don't want to call it pressure, because pressure seems a little negative, but hearing the voice of the people to say, this is what we want. This is, why we need this, and to kind of keep that conversation going. So it really is going to be the CBOs and the public and the grassroots efforts that helps that boom. As Bernadine said, you want corporate and those things to get involved, but reparations is also a very touchy topic, right? There's a lot of feelings and emotions and opinions about it. But the next step is really for the legislatures to take the recommendations and to help them be formed in a way that something can be passed so people can receive whatever reparations looks like.
I think that's awesome. Today is April 5th, 55 years later after the assassination of Dr. King on April 4th. I think he would be very pleased that this conversation is finally not just spoken in homes, just in our churches, but the fact that we could be here on April 5th, 2023, with California bringing this effort to the forefront as it is doing, that's pretty phenomenal.
I agree. That's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. Sister Kara, what say you as we bring this conversation to a pause, because we want to make sure that we, the LBE, follow too, so that we can be in the know and see what it is that perhaps we can do more of to support this effort.
Yes. I have so many things running through my mind with this conversation. And I think the thing that is resonating the most is before this session started, I mentioned to you one of the notes that I had in talking about the price tag that's been attached to this already before even the recommendations have gone forward, and linking that to what Dr. King once called America's defaulted promissory note to her citizens of color. And reflecting on Dr. Charles's statement about just the importance of the local voices and those who are bearing witness to this and have the opportunities to speak into these sorts of movements across our nation. I think of Dr. King also speaking of having been to the mountaintop and reflecting on the fact that we here in Flagstaff live at the foot of the mountain. We live very close to the mountaintop, and we are bearing witness to these narratives. We are part of these conversations, and as the Live Black Experience project, we are ringing out to the nation the importance of these conversations, reminding our local community that these conversations matter, that we have citizens in our community who are small in number but mighty in voice, and that we are continuing this conversation in ways that need to be both localized, put forth statewide and taken to the nation. And so it's just an honor to be part of that and to keep this conversation moving in all the ways that we do through this project, in these dialogues, in the marketplaces where we are bringing equity to our local commerce, in the artistic fashions that we find to continue to tell our stories and bring that narrative forward to remind folks, to quote Miss Seeley from from The Color Purple, we are here, and we are still here. We will be here, and we are continuing in that presence. And it is time to have our voices not be on mute anymore, but brought to the forefront and reminding the nation that you made us a promise, and we are here to cash in on it. And we are not simply talking about a monetary check, but we are certainly hoping to cash that promissory note that we have in the form of our Constitution, which says that we all have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In our the vows that we hold sacred of our nation, saying that all men are created equal, applying that to all women and to all peoples, including our Black and Brown and other folks who have been historically excluded from those sorts of comments. So we are continuing this conversation. As you said, Dr. Lewis, Ms. Bernadine, we are not going to stop at this conversation. We know that the work in California continues, and so too does ours. And so we thank our audience, as always, for joining us tonight and in our future conversations on this topic. We thank you, Dr. Charles, for being here with us, and we thank Assemblyman Jones Sawyer for the time that he was able to join us, as well as his team member who sat with us earlier. Until next time, community, we, as always, bid you go in grace.
Thank you.